Shri Ganeshaya Namaha. Apara Satchit Sukhavari Yasyor Mimatram Bhuvanam Samastam Guhahitam Tam Ramanam Gabhiram Chinta Vihinam Hradi Chintayami. Om Shri Chinmaya Sadgurave Namaha. Last night our question was, can we conquer time? Psychological time is one with the self created by thoughts, where there is the mental movement of becoming something, of wanting to become something, of being afraid one may not become that. Psychological time comes into picture. We distinguished between clock time and the sense of time that our own mind creates, and we gave such definitions for psychological time as it is the distance not between two physical events, rather it is the distance between a bundle of notions of who I am and another bundle of concepts of who I want to become. In other words, if I am at peace with the present moment, I am not fancying becoming anything, I am not afraid of not becoming something, I am totally in terms with the present moment, there is no psychological time there. So our mind has all these thoughts moving in a certain pattern. All of us, the humanity, are conditioned to think in certain ways. In the East or in the West, everywhere you and I have certain desires, and in this medium of the desires of the mind, the personal self, personal worth, self-worth, self-esteem, self-judgment, self-perception, ideas of what I was, what I am, and what I want to be, and mark my words, ideas. What I really am, God knows, in a manner of saying, but I carry ideas. So last night our topic was psychological time, and apparently tonight our topic is a very different one. Who am I? I would dare say right at the beginning this evening that the topic tonight is not at all different from the topic last evening. The one human problem came in one disguise last evening, and the same problem stares us in the face this evening in another disguise. To ask, can we conquer psychological time, is no different from asking, who am I, for where there is time, there is the I, and time is I. So this evening, we shall labor to throw light on this phenomenon again of the self with small s, please. You may call it ego, you may call it an individual identity. I would use the word the self with a small s. This self is created by thoughts and revolving around this thought construction of the self, there are hundreds of other evaluations, judgments, and human sorrow and human joy. In my talk tonight, I shall not answer this question, who am I? Rather, I shall try to show that this question, who am I, puts the axe at the very base of all human suffering. I shall attempt to show that the sense of I is the very foundation of numerous forms of human predicaments. In a simple domestic scenario to begin with, let's say I married a few months ago, came into this joint family. Excuse me for giving an example which may not be very common, but most of you know a joint family scenario. I am the new daughter-in-law. I came from my particular background, and here I am as the daughter-in-law. My husband, my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, and a few brothers and sisters of my husband are all under one roof in a joint family setting. And alas, as it happens sometimes, after a few days or a few weeks, there are various differences in values, perceptions, expectations, etc. And after 6 months, I ask myself, in this family, who am I? Tonight's question. Where am I? Who am I? What is my position? Am I really well received here? Do all want me? Am I truly a loved one? Even by my husband, the man called my husband. Does he really love me? Who am I? Hum hai kaun? Hum aapke hai kaun? I do not like to indulge in more humor, but you know, there is this question, who am I? In the medium of a lot of relationships, you and I are asking this question actually. We had good understanding before, let us say, as partners who started a new startup company, but as it happens sometimes, after a while there is some confusion. Then I ask, who am I in his eyes now? And you ask, who am I in his eyes now? So, we do ask this question, but we do not go to the depths of the issue. Generally, we stay on the surface. The mind, drawing from memories, yesterday's hurts or last week's gratifications, constructs a sense of I and labels it judges it as pretty good. I am very fine today, or I am not really all that good today. If I am pretty good, the mind is very capable of saying, I need to remain like that for the whole year to come, for long time to come. How to sustain this good sense of the self? If I feel bad, how can I move from this feeling bad about myself to feeling good about myself? So from I1 we want to move to I2, capital I, sense of I. And it is here that the spiritual wisdom has a bearing on all these issues. It is rightly said by many thinkers that in science, typically one wonders about things and phenomena outside, and the question is, what is that? What is this? In spirituality, the question is, who am I? This question assumes special importance in the so-called the way of wisdom. I must admit, in spirituality of another kind, the way of devotion, one is dwelling on God. Thinking of God in some way or the other. Various religions, various mystics, great seers have talked about God, the Supreme, the Creator, various names, Ek Onkar, Father in Heaven, Ram, Krishna, Shiva, and all that. So in the Bhakti Marga, into which I shall not go much, on this evening at least, one thinks about God. Incidentally, in that exercise, one's self dissolves away. That too aims at undoing the false construction of the self. But in what we call the way of wisdom, we are taking cognizance directly of this self rising in ourselves. In fear, there is someone who is afraid. In desire, there is some entity that is desiring. In hurt, there is something in me that is hurt. So we can call it a center. There is in me a center that is pleased at times, displeased at other times, annoyed at yet another time. So what is this center? Is this center something absolute, or is this center a product of conditioning? Is this center that is hurt or that rejoices a programmable and programmed entity? Is the significance of this question, who am I? A spiritual classic like the Bhagavad Gita addresses the issue of one's identity and does a bit of groundwork, does a bit of preparatory teaching, like in fact a whole lot of verses from the Bhagavad Gita just ask us to know our personality constitution, for which the word is Swadharma. In a well-known and much quoted verse of the Gita, chapter 3, verse 35, Sri Krishna says, Shreyan swadharmo vigunaha paradharmat swanushtitat swadharme nidhanam shreyah paradharmo bhayavaha. Which means everyone should act as per one's true nature. One should not pretend and imitate someone else. When one imitates someone else, falling for some temptations, maybe pursuing some false prestige, or maybe just under fear and pressure and whatever, one is not oneself. That somebody else's nature is paradharma. My true nature is swadharma. And what a wonderful advice Sri Krishna gives in the Gita. He says, first thing to live a life of order is to recognize that pretending is harmful. Putting a facade, putting up some false image for whatever reason is not going to give us true peace. Shed, avoid all pretending and be yourself. And being yourself, working in the reality of how God made you, reach the highest. A certain Christian minister wrote a book. God made you an original, do not die a duplicate. So if we imitate, if we just pretend like being somebody else, we become a duplicate. Everyone can see that a lot of complications and stress and avoidable suffering all come about because you and I, speaker not at all excluded, on a day-to-day basis puts up a facade. Many a time we say, what to do? Unless I show myself in that way, I'll be in trouble. But showing myself in some false way, I invite a lot of other trouble. What to do? We had a lady in Bombay saying what to do some 200 times daily. From some part of Mumbai, she used to come to my morning class 7 a.m. in our ashram in Powai, catching some bus, some auto rickshaw, etc. And after the class, she would meet me. What to do, Swamiji? Today it was so difficult to reach this place. What to do? There was no auto rickshaw available. What to do? Bombay is getting very difficult for simple people like me to travel. What to do? And all of us asked her, why do you say this, what to do, so many times? She said, what to do? It is my habit. From childhood I have been saying this. What to do? Now, you and I have the same dilemma with respect to pretending. We feel helpless. One of you may say to me, I wouldn't be surprised if you do so, that it's not just one false image, we keep some 10 false images, and depending on situation, we put the mask. Some Kannada author, D.V. Gundappa, wrote like that. Ravana had 10 faces, and typically we human beings have 100 faces. And at different times, different faces come forth, he says, very humorously, but with a good punch indeed. Now, interestingly, our first reading of the Gita would make us think that this Swadharma, one's own nature, and Paradharma, somebody else's nature, are a matter of choosing duties. Do your duty. Don't get into somebody else's duty. Find out your duty and be dedicated to it. Be devoted to it. Is the simple reading. And yes, lot of us easily understand, that's right, I must do my duty. Why worry about anything else? Yeah, and so on. But please see, behind the duty, there is the doer. Swadharma right away touches on two sides of the same issue. This is my duty because I am of a certain type, the way God made me, or nature made me. If some of you are not very comfortable with this God coming into the picture, let's say nature. Obviously, nature has made us all very, very differently, diversely. Some are by nature temperamental, some are by nature going slow, some are by nature very fast, physically, intellectually, not only by B, body, but by M and I, mind and intellect too. We are all very different. Of course, broad categories have been made, broad classes. Those who drive and those who are driven and those who watch maybe. There are various kinds, B type, A type, in Western psychology and Eastern models. Certain personality types have been identified. So, a false projection of oneself is paradharma. A projection or presenting of oneself true to one's constitution is swadharma, and the Gita calls it a very healthy state of affairs. If you and I, day in and day out, present ourselves as we truly are, without a single lie, then it's a very healthy state of affairs, not only for achievement in the world, which also is assured, but for spiritual growth, for a greater integration. You know, integer is a whole number. Integration is unifying ourselves. In contrast, when we are something inside but show ourselves in some other way, there is a division, split, there is fragmentation. While we make a beginning with personality types and have some contentment, some satisfaction at the answer to who am I, we say, truly speaking, I am a slow going person, but I pretend to be very fast, etc. But inwardly I am a slow person. So who am I? I am a slow person in some context. This is a good beginning indeed. We need to inquire more and more deeply. The same Gita at another place goes to a dizzy height indeed, and that is where I would say in the Gita the question who am I is touched with the utmost seriousness and greatest sublimity or subtlety. In the 13th chapter, Sri Krishna says, well, this entire life of ours could be viewed as consisting of two aspects, the known and the knower. Idam shariram kaunteya kshetramityabhidiyate etad yo vetti tam prahuhu kshetrajna iti tadvidaha. Verse 2, or in more versions it is the very first verse of chapter 13. There is the field of the known and then there is the knower. And every one of us can relate to it. Yes, I am the knower. I am the knower of objects outside. I am the knower of physical sensations, heat or cold. I am the knower of hurt and pleasure, pride and all those. I am the knower. Yes, Sri Krishna, I am with you. I can relate to what you are saying. Our life is broadly the field of the known and the knower. Every one of us is the knower. Then the Lord drops his bombshell in the second verse, which in some versions is the third verse. Kshetrajnam chapi mam vidhi sarvakshetreshu bharata kshetra kshetrajnayor jnanam yatta jnanam matam mama. Arjun, the knower in all fields of knowing is no other than me, myself. The Lord says He is the knower in all. So He as though pushes us out, like pushing out some unauthorized occupant in some hutment or accommodation. Just a while ago we appreciated, well, in all knowing, in all feeling, in all experiencing, there is in us the experiencer. We earlier talked about the center that gets hurt, the center in us that gets gratified. We say to each other, I enjoyed it so much. Who is that I? I am so hurt, I am so bruised today, etc. Who is that I? That question we raised. So if I am the knower, and here comes Sri Krishna's statement that He is the knower in all. And He seems to say, Sarvakshetreshu, in all fields of knowledge. That means in the field of so-called your experiences, in the field of so-called her experiences, in the field of so-called my experiences, the truth that knows is one, and that is one with God. God is the knower. This someone like Adi Shankara takes as a very significant statement in the Bhagavad Gita, and this is taken by the non-dual teachers as a pointer to everyone essentially being pure awareness and the ego constructed of thoughts being a mere myth. The classics like Bhagavad Gita have so much said in different chapters that no wonder on the soil of India itself, numerous great minds, great intellectuals interpreted these classics in different ways. To make a passing remark, Sri Ramanujacharya, while respecting Adi Shankara's comments, took a slightly different stand, and he takes a certain verse of the 15th chapter, Mamai Vamsho Jiva Loke Jiva Bhutas Sanatanaha, the 7th verse of chapter 15, where Sri Krishna, the same speaker, says, a part of me becomes the individual. Everyone in this created world is a part of me. So Sri Ramanujacharya said, let's go by this mainly, and let us take other verses of the Gita in certain contexts. Let us interpret those, but this is the punchline. God is the whole, and every one of us is the part. Mama eva amshaha. It is said so clearly. Now coming back to the 13th chapter's verses, and there we have so much that we can see. Here is an experience, and we first said the experienced and the experiencer. I am the experiencer, but who am I? And is this I a variable? And especially, can this I undergo a transformation? Situation being the same, could I be very hurt on one occasion, and could I be simply unperturbed on another occasion? Other parameters being same, the center could react differently. So please see, there is this center which, being a programmable entity, reacts differently to same external situations. In fact, first of all, leave alone reacting, it sees the situation differently. It sees the situation as, not at all an insulting situation. Who said it is insulting? This is very pleasant. He said, I have no head, and very humorous indeed, Another day, if somebody said, you seem to have nothing above your shoulders, I would interpret it as, what a tremendous insult, how did he know it in the first place? Whatever. A set of reactions coming from me on a certain day, and a set of reactions coming from the same me, a me, on another day are so different. Why? The me is different. And is it possible to be without a me? Is it possible to stay in a certain emptiness where praise and insult as though simply pass through, like light passing through a transparent surface? Is it possible to have pure attention and no reaction to stimulus, for you are attentive and you are not reacting? You see what is said, you don't interpret it, you don't categorize it as either praise or insult, and you don't personalize it. This is said for me, you don't say. Though you know in a way that he is telling me, it is as though you look left and right. Who is he talking about? Sometimes all of us do in good humor. But if the same could be done in spiritual wisdom, that would be a quantum leap, a tremendous change. Sometimes it is a strategy for us. We roll up our sleeves or we prepare ourselves, we put a chest up and say, take a deep breath. Today, no matter what they are going to say, I am not going to be hurt. So then, if they actually say bad things, because of that will, because of that resolve, we say, okay, is there anything more you want to say today? And so on. That is a different thing. That will, that resolve, that preparation may break down after some time. We may not be able to keep up that resistance, because one by one, the words said by the other person, the Ashtottara Shatanamavali, as they call it sometimes, 108 names, you are this and you are that and you are this and like that, 108 epithets thrown at us. We have limits. Finally we say enough is enough, come on. So it is one thing to resolve, and through willpower and certain conditioning of the mind, certain prior planning and strategy, psychological preparedness, that you face praise and insult. But it's quite another to really have an inner emptiness, in which on one hand there is great alertness, great attention. Surely we are not talking about thick-skinnedness or dullness, etc. There is great sensitivity, but then there is no attachment to an image. You think you are a very learned man, you are attached to that idea, I am very learned, and in an important gathering, suddenly, maybe most unexpectedly, everybody says, well, all of us believed you were a learned person and what fools we were. Now we know you are nothing. You are always bluffed and somehow put up an image. It could be very hurting to you. What? Are you all kidding? And all say, no, we are telling you the truth. It could be devastating. You could have a sleepless night afterwards. Why? I would say, not because they said whatever they said, but because you are attached to the image, I am a learned man. There is nothing wrong in being learned. In fact, spiritually speaking, there is nothing wrong in not being learned. It's utterly unnecessary for everybody to be very learned. If all are scholarly, the world would have been chaotic. Thank God there are a limited number of scholars who themselves are quite a problem sometimes, going around and bluffing to large audiences and confusing them utterly, and by the seventh day disappear somewhere, leaving 300 people at a loss. What happened? And so on. So, I think learning is not a necessity to live a happy life. But in this world, some are learned, some are good singers, some are good dancers, some are good cooks, some are good gardeners, some have multiple talents. And thank God, what I would envy, if at all it has room there, is not any of these talents. Some people in this world are simple. I envy them. My God, if I had her simplicity, how stress-free my life would have been. In olden days, I too sought talent. If I could sing like him, if I looked so wonderful as he does, if I had her height or his, talent, this is the way of the world. But thinking about life, understanding life more and more, we find that what is most desirable is a simplicity, and that is the erasure of the I. I believe a certain king had called a gathering, a meeting, and he himself was yet to arrive. All others had come. And a person looking very ordinary just walked in. How he made it through the security arrangements, no one knows. But he came and he occupied the chair of the king. And the minister questioned him, "Who are you?" And that man questioned back, "Who am I?" "I am asking you, who are you?" The man would just say, "Who am I?" And the minister apparently, minister means the prime minister or like senator, said to this person, "Are you some great scholar that you dare to take this chair?" He said, "I am above any scholar." "Are you a great wrestler?" "I am above any wrestler." "Are you a millionaire or billionaire?" "I am above any billionaire." Like that it goes. At the end, the prime minister of the king yells at this intruder, "Are you God?" And this man says, "I am above God." And then the prime minister says, "Come on, there is nothing above God." And then this man says, "I am that nothing." And walks away. For this being nothing is really wonderful, almost above God, or that is godly. When we are nothing in our heart, nothing can hurt us, nothing can blow into our ego. But all these stories, all these illustrations are very tricky. I say such a story, and if all of you appreciate, I lose my nothingness. I feel so good about myself. I believe somebody went up the stage and said, "Nobody said so much about the nature of the ego as I did." Do you know that? So there is the emergence of the ego. Now connecting it with the serious discussion we had yesterday, time, you find that the ego is built by the movement of mind, where memories supply to us material to pigeonhole ourselves. Memories of how someone talked ill of me last week supply the building blocks for me to come to a conclusion today that I have not been doing well. Look at what they said last week. So many of them saying so bad things about me. Memories of one event make me think of myself as bad. In the same way, memories of some other event make me build the idea I am good. Now, if we don't fall a prey to memories, we are in the present with full attention. Are we good or are we bad? There is no good, no bad. I am is the truth. You and I are very conditioned, very programmed, very habituated to have a point of view in everything. I believe Jiddu Krishnamurti once asked some gentleman, "My friend, can you live your life without any point of view?" See the flavor of that question. So difficult indeed. Many of us would spring forth saying, "In my point of view, that is not possible." About that too we have a point of view right away. Somebody asked Krishnamurti, "What do you think of Osho?" And his answer was, "I don't think of Osho." There the matter ends. That is psychological simplicity. I am not saying that anyone imitating that has psychological simplicity. Don't go home saying, "Now I know how to answer any question." What do you think of Swami Chidananda? I don't think of him. And in your bosom you have many things to say. A day is not enough. But suppose you just memorize or just take from some example, some anecdote of Ramakrishna or Ramana, Krishnamurti or Chinmayanandji from somewhere. In such and such situation, such and such saint said like that, and I got to say the same. That will be a burdensome affair. That would be an outside-in approach. You take something and try to push it in and make yourself in conformity with that image, picture, personality description. You want to become a Gandhi, you want to become an Einstein. While all of them inspire us, lives of great men do remind us, we can make our life sublime and departing leave behind us footprints on the sands of time, said the American poet Longfellow, and it is true. You and I have that dimension in us where a lot of people inspire us and we want to be like them. However, the other side of the story is, for radical transformation within us, we cannot afford to have the circuitous path. In fact, all paths are circuitous. For radical change, a change in us, in the depth of us, what we need is to meet with life, outside and inside, what we perceive and how certain reactions rise in our mind, etc., the whole thing. What we need is to meet with this whole thing without a reference, that and this. Meet with this directly. Meet with what is, straight away. There are a lot of spiritual literature which prescribe, do this, do that. And I am sure it has a place. Then there are portions of literature which describe, Gandhi did this, Vinoba said that, Mother Teresa dealt with the situation in this way, the Dalai Lama other day made such comment. That is all description. So prescription and description are of course available, but to handle our situation at a given moment, what we need is meeting with that situation in its entirety. If we go for what is that prescription, what is that description, it is like in engineering you say energy loss, efficiency loss, overheads. In finance you say there are overheads. Comparison and conformity are overheads. Meet with the situation directly. And mind you, I mentioned that the situation is not just the outer stimuli, it is the inner reactions. If you are attentive to the inner reactions as they are rising, there is a whole lot that you learn right away. Not from this book, not from that memory, but you learn from this state of mind itself. Learning this moment is of the greatest value than from any book, however great it may be. The question, who am I, therefore, is intimately related to an awareness of the present moment in its entirety. If, think of it, I am inspired by this question, who am I, which champions like Ramana Maharshi popularized. And I decide, I'm going to go for this who am I inquiry. This is my sadhana. And I sit down. Who am I? Who am I? A thought rises. Well, I am a middle-aged lady. Then I say, as per the book, because book says, avoid all answers, go deeper. Endlessly they have things to do. Whereas you have apparently seen the value of the need for inner change. Therefore you are asking, who am I? But as you ask, who am I? Suppose thoughts rise. I shall ask, who am I? And very soon remove the ego. You brought psychological time. Do you see it? You introduced the destruction of ego at the end of the, a certain period of time. You build it and you say, I will eliminate it. Can you note or notice what is happening in you without introducing some artificialities? Can you stay with fact and not generate a world of fancies? And what is the fact, please? The fact is there is boredom, probably. The fact that this moment could be boredom in the minds of many. In the minds of many others, the fact could be, I am not joking, could be a great curiosity. Can you be fully aware of that curiosity? The fact, at this moment, I am not theoretizing, at this moment, the fact could be in somebody's, I wouldn't say one mind, I would say in somebody's whole experience, a certain happiness. I am so fortunate to be here. And you could be so happy you don't listen these statements. It becomes an absorption. Can you be fully aware? And what do I mean by this full awareness? I need to throw light on it. When you are aware only of the tip of the iceberg, you don't know why you are happy. Long back I was in Orlando and I was giving a talk. A certain lady in the second row or so was looking at me with such wide eyes. I got frightened a little bit. And there was a lot of happiness on her face and so on. And second day also she was looking at me like that with great love and happiness and excitement. Third day I ended up at her home for some prasad, as we call it. And then she said, Swamiji, today only I discovered why I am so happy in your class. I said, I am also eager to know. I noticed that you are very happy. And then she revealed the secret. She admitted that 3 days she too didn't know. She just was happy, Then she said, after 3 days I found out you look exactly like my nephew. So our happiness and sorrow many times are like that. We don't know. Now, being aware of the entirety of outer stimulus, a sound, a picture, a face, a gesture, whatever, and the inner reactions very quietly, without jumping to conclusions. Being aware very quietly, very gently, shows that the sense of I that we are carrying generally, I am good, I made it. I made it before he or she did. Or other ways. Nobody knows the dark side of my personality. There is a whisper going on within us, continuously, like a painter painting the picture. Continuously, this mind does it. If we could be silently aware of what is happening, in fact, the essence of who am I is not so much the question, as I have found out, but the awareness, the observation. That direct awareness questions the construction. When we are not aware, the construction of a certain self-judgment thrives. It snowballs into a gigantic figure. Sometimes it is a bloated picture of oneself, which is not immediately painful. Eventually it causes problems. At the moment it is very good to feel we are the greatest, we are the best. Nobody is as good as I am. At the moment it is a good feeling. But once you are attached to it, it is the womb of trouble later. But very many other times we know how a negative judgment of oneself snowballs into bigger and bigger. I am a great sinner. Nobody is so ungrateful as I am. Nobody is so insensitive as I am, etc. And it can snowball. Who am I is the one that melts the snow. The snowflakes here are memories. If one is not a victim of memories, there is no I. The I vanishes into thin air when one is not enslaved by memories. Memories come handy, but if they do not rise unduly. Here when we go on the freeways, sometimes so many cars are on the several lanes. It always fascinates me how you people change the lanes and take the exit and go. And while merging also, sometimes talking, saying, laughing, joking, but keeping an eye behind and expert drivers, I find, are able to merge and get into the fastest lane so easily, so smoothly, and come out also so smoothly. It's just like second nature. Can you manage memories like that? Use the memories, drop the memories, get into memory lanes, exit the memory lanes. Then there is no I, no ego in you, no self. When needed, you come out with your identity. When not needed, you are out of the freeways. You are not caught in that memory lanes. No wonder they say down the memory lane. Some of us are unable to come out of the memory lanes. As even we are getting close to 2004, we haven't come out of 1999 yet. Where is the question of moving from 2003 to 2004? I am still in 99. That is terrible. And how does it happen? That kind of getting stuck is lack of intelligence, not the intelligence that goes into what is called intelligence quotient and all those. We say IQ, intelligence quotient. That intelligence which goes into a high IQ, etc., is of a very different kind. Logical abilities, mathematical abilities, abilities to guess and all that. This intelligence is not logical. It is above logic. It's not emotional. It's not EQ also. But it is something above both IQ and EQ. Both intelligence quotient and emotional quotient. It is, I would say, seeing. One is able to see. The seeing is a tremendous faculty. And it is your nature. Alas, one is away from one's nature. One is caught in what thoughts have built. Like Swami Chinmayananji gave the example once of somebody, a young boy in a traditional setting, who in the company of a few friends took a little of alcohol, and more than the bit of intoxication that set in, because he came from a very orthodox family and certain value systems, felt so miserable out there at some public place. He felt very guilty, very ashamed, very afraid, and was shouting, it seems, "Take me home, take me home." And his friends also realized, we should not have given him, he is such a Gandhi, we should not have, And they also sympathized with him and lifted him and took him home, and he went in. But he was so perturbed. Even as he lay on a bed at his home with parents around, he was continuously saying, "Take me home, take me home." What would you say about this? This is a situation where you see, in his mind, there was this construction. I am away, I have taken some alcohol, I should not have, my parents will be very, very upset. They will ask me to go to Varanasi, take a dip in Ganga and come back. Till then, whatever. He thought like that, Maha Shuddhi, and they will spend a lot on a Havan and home at home now. A lot of, So a construction that I am at some far off place now, I need to go home. No, that construction did not leave him. Even as he lay on his own bed, in his own room, in his own house, with parents standing next to him, he even now says, "Take me home, take me home." Then of course, after the alcohol's effect subsides a little and father goes away and mother gives a hug and all that touch, little caring touch, slowly he says, "I'm sorry," he cries, etc. Now this being an example, an exaggerated example of what mind can do to us, you and I are in fact caught, we are trapped in what thoughts make of us. Even Shakespeare said, nothing is right or wrong, thoughts make it so. Nobody should misuse this, that is not the idea. Do anything you like and quote Shakespeare. That would be like, if I may quickly mention, someone heard all this Vedanta and said, there is no doership, there is no enjoyership, everything is an illusion, questionable. And he stole something, and police were behind him. And he ran. And when finally the police caught him, he quoted some Swami or some Lama, some seer. Haven't you heard him? He says, it is all an illusion. So my stealing was an illusion, please. But the policemen, of course, had heard those Lamas and Swamis. The policemen said, yeah, and our arresting also is an illusion. For 10 days, enjoy our hospitality. But yeah, we fully agree with you, it's all an illusion. Some whiplashes, whatever, are all illusion. So we dare not contradict the revered Swami. So the policemen were very smart too. So you and I are not to take law into our hands. I do not mean that. But we need to have a certain insight into the way our mind works and the way the self is constructed, the way there is fear, there is desire, and a whole lot of other emotions. In every one of us, as awareness, as our very nature, there is a profound stillness. In that stillness, there is no self, the separative self. Not even a tiny wave of being superior to X or being inferior to Y has room in that profound stillness. Somehow, that stillness is lost sight of. If we say, I have lost sight of that stillness, then it becomes a tricky situation. Who is this I? So let us say, the stillness is lost sight of. In awareness, in complete awareness, not fragmented, partitioned, compartmentalized awareness, not the awareness where one all the same chooses, where all the same one says, this is a good thought and that is a bad thought. Not the awareness where one says, I have some ego, but I'm feeling good about it, I'll retain this. When it's an unpleasant ego, I will conduct the who am I inquiry and eliminate it. Then this choosing, this bias, this going for a lobby inside the mind is a terrible affair. Then there is no awareness at all. True awareness is invariably choiceless. The awareness where there is some choosing, delighting in some self-perception and fearing or feeling displeased with another self-perception is not awareness at all. It is another game of the mind, another play of the mind, where you are caught in the mind. This stillness has no division. Where there is the self, there is the division. This division, others and I, he, she and I was good, nowadays I am bad, this is a division. I am meditating well these days, and hope to keep it up. This division, all these divisions are a departure from that stillness. Like we said yesterday, to sip a bit of water, do I need to know I am 46 years old? In the same way, for you, someone among you, to watch a sunset, is it necessary to know that you got a promotion the earlier day? To think? Not necessary, unwarranted. But normally what happens? We say normally, but spiritually speaking, it's not very normal. Spiritually speaking, Ramanas, Nisargadats, etc. were normal, and we are all in different lanes and levels and grades of abnormality. I believe some air hostess asked some passenger in one of the international airways on the plane, "Are you vegetarian or normal?" So there are different notions. What is normal? It varies from place to place. So I too said, normally we cannot watch a sunset with some thought of, I got a promotion at last yesterday. Another day, we are unable to watch the sunset without the thought of, again I have been made the scapegoat in my office, and so on. The sun might be saying, watch me once at least, fully. It could be the sun, or it could be your daughter. Your daughter may say to you, "Dad, look at me once, fully." Therefore, no wonder great seers appeal to us. Spiritual maturity is not just a matter of knowing a lot of shlokas or books or mantras or rituals, which all have a place. Spiritual maturity is intimately related to seeing your daughter's face with no thought about who you are. Of course, at that moment, you as father might be relevant. All right. That also may not be necessary many times. Like your daughter has a certain sorrow, certain pain, certain agony, certain fear, let's say. To understand that fear, which is writ large on her face, perhaps it is homework for both of us. Is it necessary to know I am the father? Can I not see her face and understand her fear as a fellow human being, as a fellow traveler? Will I be more effective when I look at her as a human being whom I love and look at myself as a human being? Is it necessary for a thought to arise, she is my daughter, I am her father, and what I need to give her is now fatherly love? Is it necessary? Go into it as homework. I will also go into it. To categorize love as fatherly love, motherly love, brotherly love, of which we are very fond. We are very, very fond of classifying, categorizing. Perhaps we should go into it very subtly, not by scholarship. Don't go and gather books by Immanuel Kant and Hegel and all the books and please don't send long emails to me tomorrow. Swamiji, you had a problem last night. Here are 3 attachments, each running into some hundreds of kilobytes. Please read them at your leisure, and if you are interested, I can send you more. Shiva Shiva. Attachments, are a problem in life. And in emails too. Simple, short, main window of the email is so soothing. It is a great stress reliever. So who am I? Who am I truly? Who am I? Not as thoughts through their propaganda tell me, you are this, you are that. Thoughts are a great propagandist sitting inside us. Our memories are a great lobby with their bias, with their vested interests, so to say. And we have a certain idea who we are. So not through another set of thoughts, but really speaking, by simple, alert, gentle alertness. I would use gentle alertness because it's not an alertness where you are becoming a Scotland Yard, or CIA agent. I am going to track down this ego. After listening to tonight's lecture, I have made priority number 1, this hunting down the ego. Then you are assuming one more identity. As I said, a CIA agent looking for ego. No, then there is no gentleness in that. It's good if tonight's lecture has made an impression on you, but without assuming any position, without assuming any picture of, any idea of, I think now I am an advanced spiritual seeker at the end of these 6 lectures. In fact, somebody in Bakersfield told me also, Swamiji, your lectures have now a different flavor, and I assure you, you are jet set, some such word he used, and we are with you. Let's go on a jet journey. So, in spirituality also, same trick. I'm sure many of you would say, now, this is what we wanted to say to you. And I take it sportively. I don't condemn it. Please don't think I am... My language is not so much this should and should not in this context. Elsewhere I do have should and should not. There is a field in life where should and should not have a place. But I'm in this very subtle affair of understanding one's life, in this very subtle affair of watching the movement of the mind, rather than should and should not, when there is this thought, I think now we are jet set, jet age. This self-inquiry is a high-level sadhana, and I am a high-level sadhaka now. These are, again, at the most, take it sportively, have a hearty laugh about it, and put it aside. For true inquiry requires that you do not have any badge, name tag upon you. And I may say, in the intensity of that pure awareness, the question is no more necessary. There is no I to ask, no I to be asked. In intense awareness, something happens. That's what they call awakening. In the awakening, a whole lot of seeker, the sought, the path, the tools used, the domain of time, obstacles, and ways to overcome them, and all these vanish into thin air. Awareness becomes the beginning and the end when it is utterly pure.